Good afternoon, everyone. This is Wendy Kilgore, the Senior Director of Research at AACRAO. Welcome to today's webinar, where we are going to discuss AACRAO guidance and a discussion with the Department of Education on the Transcript Withhold Regulations. Before we get started with that, I want to hand us over to Melanie Gottlieb, our Executive Director.
Oh, thank you, Wendy. Good afternoon. I'm Melanie Gottlieb. I'm the Executive Director of AACRAO, and I want to welcome you to today's Part 3 webinar, where we will continue to explore the questions around implementation of the recent Department of Ed regulations regarding withholding transcripts. We are very thankful today to have an important guest from the Department of Education. Dave Musser is the Deputy Director of Policy Implementation and Oversight for the Federal Student Aid Office at the department. He's been with the department for 13 years, first as a program reviewer with the Chicago-Denver School Participation Division, and then as a Title IV subject matter expert with the Policy Liaison and Implementation team. Prior to his federal service, Dave worked in corporate and school settings such as Career Education Corporation and Northwestern University's Undergraduate Financial Aid Office. Dave, we really appreciate the time that you have taken to be with us today and to answer our questions. Our members are working hard to find and implement solutions that properly balance the needs and interests of both the learner and the institution while remaining in compliance with state and federal legislation and regulation. We're going to start our conversation today with a brief overview of AACRAO guidance on the recent regulations by Dr. Wendy Kilgore, Senior Director of Research, followed by remarks from Dave Musser, and then we'll have some time for a brief Q&A. A note on the Q&A period, Wendy will be available to answer questions related to the AACRAO guidance. William Gill, AACRAO Senior Director of Government Relations, will take the lead for any questions that were directed to the department that were submitted in advance. These have been shared with the department in preparation for the Q&A session. We will also be tracking any other questions that individuals have in the chat and in the Q&A area, and we will try to get to as many as we can today. However, any questions that we are unable to answer today, we will collaborate with the department in order to bring those questions to the forefront for our members and get answers. So with that, I am going to turn the mic over to my colleague, Wendy.
Thank you, Melanie. Appreciate you. And again, thank you, David, also for being here today. Very excited to have you here. For those of you who joined me on last Wednesday, I'm going to show a few slides that you've already seen, but just to get us all on the same page for those who weren't there, I'm going to share a little bit about our guidance. Not the entire set, not the entire data piece, but just to get us grounded in the same area. So our objectives today, as we've already said, is to share AACRAO's guidance and engage in a Q&A with the Department of Education, specifically David. I'm going to start off with defining things because we found that people were conflating two terms, partial transcript holds versus partial transcripts. And we want to make sure that we're all using the same language because the regulation is about holds and partial transcripts means a certain thing already in our lexicon in higher education. So we have decided that partial transcript holds, to define it this way, refers to the practice of suppressing certain information from a learner's transcript, such as final grades for a specific term, an earned credential, or the entire content of a term, including course subject, course number, course title, and final grades, as an example. So that's a partial transcript hold, so suppressing certain information. That is differentiated from partial transcripts, and we're trying to, again, separate these two because they're different. Partial transcripts, on the other hand, refer to an institution's practice of allowing a learner to release only a portion of their academic history. For example, a learner has both graduate and undergraduate academic history at an institution may choose to release only their undergraduate history or only their graduate history at some institutions. Not all institutions will do that, but some allow that partial transcript. That's differentiated by the level of the education recorded on the transcript between undergraduate and graduate. Differentiated from partial transcript holds, as I described before. So in discussion of this regulation, we are going to use partial transcript holds. we had some data for institutions that about planning to use partial transcript holds. 1% are already been doing so using partial transcript holds. An additional 7% say they're probably going to use it. Yes, it'll be a new process for their institution in response to the change in regulation. Another 15% have said maybe we've not decided. They're probably waiting for our guidance and for David's discussion today and some FAQs and some internal discussions about whether their technology system can actually support partial transcript holds. I've been watching the communications on our AACRAO exchange and see people talking about how are you doing it? How are you doing it? So there's a pretty good core of undecided. If we take these numbers across about 3,200 institutions right now, that number changes all the time. So if David knows that number off the top of my head and wants to correct me here or later on, that's great. But roughly 3,000 to 3,500 institutions who receive Title IV funding and degree granting in this country. 15% are still thinking about it. So it could be a fair number of institutions trying to do this. So our guidance on partial transcript holds, which we will release to the general population or the general membership in a broader way here very shortly in the next few days or so. Given that the regulation addresses payment periods rather than the entire transcript, this leaves permission for the institutions to use partial transcript holds. And David will talk a bit about payment periods in the context of the regulation. AACRAO takes the position that completed and in-progress courses should be visible on the transcript with the understanding that certain administrative procedures may result in a suppression of the final grade for the course. For example, courses graded as incomplete or in progress, or those who have been annotated for academic renewal or forgiveness. In those instances, the transcript still shows the subject, the course number, and the title and the term that it was taken, but they tend to suppress the final grade. If a partial transcript hold is to be used as allowed by the regulation, we believe any practice and policy related to the use of partial transcript holds should treat all learners equally. So although the regulation applies to a subpopulation of students, we say if you're going to do this particular partial transcript hold practice, that applies to everyone, whether or not the new regulation from the federal government applies to them or not. But just treat all learners equally. We also strongly support using standardized practices for using partial transcript holds, akin to the standardization for transcript practices for other processes, as I said earlier, for those incomplete courses and courses still in progress. Even some of the questions asked today and in our webinar the last week and in the webinars prior to that, there's concern and questions about, well, what if we don't know if the partial transcript is being used? So that's why AACRAO is saying, let's go ahead and use this process that we already use for other things, which still leaves the content of the information there and creates a new grade so that that indicates what that grade is for, but still shows the receiving party, be it an employer, a licensing agency, or an institution, that there was work for that term. But before proceeding with the using partial transcript holds, you want to review any state regulations regarding the use of transcript holds. And currently, the Department of Education has not provided guidance on how to handle situations where these conflict with each other. The recommendations are aimed at creating a process that is similar to transcript practices currently used by most institutions for the incomplete grades and the courses in progress. For example, creating a new grade code that indicates that the grade is withheld for an outstanding balance or an administrative reason. Ensure that this grade code does not get included in any grade, credit, term, or cumulative total calculations, and include all applicable courses on the transcript for the payment period in question. This goes back to making it visible, making it anybody who receives it, they know that something is missing and they know that the grades are missing, but can expect that information at a later date. This allows institutions to process admissions, process scholarships, financial aid potentially, also registration guidance, advising, all of those things, because they can see that it's there and they can work with the student to get a final transcript. A note on guidance on transcript annotation. Neither the regulation nor the Dear Colleague letter provide any guidance on the practice of transcript annotation. Absent any guidance from the Department of Education on this topic, it is recommended that an institution seek legal counsel before deciding whether or not to pursue this practice. So that is a recap of the webinar before and an abbreviated version of our guidance, which we will release soon. And now I'm going to hand it over to David.
Thanks so much, Wendy, and thank you to William and others at AACRAO for inviting me today. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk with all of you about these new requirements. As a staff member at FSA, our job is to ensure that the department's requirements are as clear as they can possibly be under the circumstances, and that we answer your questions to the best of our ability as quickly as possible. So today, I plan to recap all of the department's new requirements and as well as our guidance on the topic. And I hope that I can help clarify certain aspects of the rule. And I also hope that I can take back with me any items that I can't answer today, if you have questions, and that we can get answers to our AACRAO colleagues, or even potentially post new FAQs on the department's website. So with no further ado, I will share my screen now and begin walking through my presentation. Okay. So as mentioned, I'm the Deputy Director for Policy Implementation and Oversight at Federal Student Aid. Our office has the job of translating legal requirements from Congress in the form of statutes, as well as new regulations into action at both our software providers, schools, students, and others, which sometimes involves providing guidance, in other cases answering questions, etc. So that's the role in which I'm speaking with you today. We're not going to have, it's not going to be too terribly complicated a presentation. I want to go through the new regulatory requirements and also all of the department's recent policy guidance on the topic. And then I want to walk through questions that have already been received and hopefully answer as many of those as I can, as well as potentially answer some questions from the live audience today. So before we start out, I want to talk through a couple of definitions that I am familiar with because I'm deeply immersed in these topics, but that not everyone who's watching might be totally familiar with. First, when we refer to Title IV HEA funds, what we mean at the department is any funds that are provided under Title IV of the Higher Education Act of 1965. And that includes programs that I'm sure you are all familiar with, Pell Grants, direct loans, supplemental educational opportunity grants, federal work study, etc. Those programs are the ones that are implicated in these new regulations. The other term that is used frequently with respect to these new rules that may not be fully, that you may not be familiar with is payment period. Now, for most institutions with traditional academic calendars, it's a very simple definition. It just means the term that you use for academic purposes, semesters, trimesters, quarters, anything like that. But there are institutions that don't use standard or non-standard terms and have non-term programs that operate in rolling starts or other kinds of things. And in those cases, a payment period has a very specific definition that the department has established in regulation. I won't get into that right now, but that's the exception. Most of the time, payment period simply means your academic term. Okay, so what are the new rules? These final regulations were published October 31st, 2024, and they will be effective July 1st of this year. Sorry, that should be October 31st, 2023. My apologies. But they'll be effective July 1st, 2024. And there are two separate, but obviously related requirements pertaining to transcripts. The first one is transcript withholding following school errors. So this requirement prevents institutions from withholding official transcripts or taking any other negative action against a student for balances that are owed due to a school's error in the administration of Title IV funds or other fraud or misconduct. This requirement is intended to ensure that when schools make errors or mistakes in managing Title IV funds, that the cost of those mistakes are not passed on to students. Which is different from the second requirement on the right here, transcript withholding for non-payment. In this rule, this requires an institution to provide an official transcript to a student that includes credits earned for all payment periods. And as I mentioned, that's normally your term, in which the student, number one, received Title IV HEA funds, which, as I mentioned, includes Pell Grants, direct loans, etc. And two, for which all institutional charges were paid or included in an agreement to pay. So those terms obviously are more complicated than they appear on the surface, and we'll talk a little bit about that in just a second. But this requirement is intended more to ensure that students that receive Title IV funds, federal aid to attend college, receive some compensation for the coursework that they both completed and paid for, while also balancing the need of the institution to have something to withhold from the student in cases where the student has not fully paid for their coursework. This was the department's best attempt at striking a balance between those two things. So let's talk about the exact regulatory requirements themselves. So first, we're going to look at the regulatory language for the first item, transcript withholding for school error. And this is under the Code of Federal Regulations, 34 CFR 668.14B33. And I paraphrase this a little bit, so it's not, the quotes are not exactly right, but this is essentially taking the context of the regulation so it's easier to read. By entering into a program participation agreement, which is the contract that the school signs with the department to participate in the Title IV aid program, an institution agrees that it will not withhold official transcripts or take any other negative action against a student related to a balance owed by the student that results in the Title IV programs, or any fraud or misconduct by the institution or its personnel. So what do those terms mean? An error in the administration of Title IV funds includes a number of things. So this is a non-exclusive list. It is these, but these items are things that the department has in mind when we discuss errors in the administration of Title IV funds. That includes errors determining whether a student is eligible. For example, they have to be an eligible citizen or an eligible non-citizen, among many other things. And also the amount of Title IV funds that the student is eligible for, and that usually involves evaluating the student's FAFSA record, commonly called an ICER, institutional student information record, and determining the exact amount of aid that they're eligible for. There are other things that a school could do that would be considered errors. There is a complicated process called the return of Title IV funds calculation that you may or may not be familiar with, where schools return funds when a student withdraws. If errors there are included in this concept, as well as cases where disbursements of Title IV funds are delayed because of some error on the school's part, rather than, for example, the student failing to provide some important piece of documentation that is needed in order to disperse funds. Separately, thought it would be helpful to go through what we mean when we say any other negative action. And here the department is really defining that very, very broadly. It includes, but is not limited to, withholding transcripts. It also includes withholding degrees or other credentials in cases where the school has made an error. It includes registration holds, referrals to collections, anything that would be considered a negative action. So this one is very broad, but only applies when there was a school error or in rarer cases, fraud or misconduct that the department has identified. So those likely won't come up very often, but administrative errors can be quite common. So the second provision is shorthand here, transcript withholding for non-payment. So here's the regulatory language for this provision. By entering into a program participation agreement, an institution agrees that upon request, the institution will provide an official transcript that includes all the credit or clock hours for payment periods in which the student received Title IV HEA funds, and for which all institutional charges were paid or included in an agreement to pay at the time the request is made. And implied here, but not directly stated, although I'm sure you guys assumed it, we mean completed, successfully completed credit or clock hours, as well as credit or clock hours that may not have been successfully completed, but were finished. We obviously don't mean anything beyond that. So here, when we're talking about transcript withholding for non-payment, this applies when both conditions are met. The school is required to transcript credits when, number one, Title IV funds have been applied to a student's account for that payment period. And again, that generally means a term. And institutional charges for that period have been fully paid. So for this purpose, when we say fully paid, we mean essentially that all of the students' payments to that point accrued sequentially have paid for all of the charges that were assessed, again, sequentially in each term prior to that. So we consider that essentially funds are paying for the oldest charges first, and then moving forward. We got some questions early on about how to differentiate between charges for different terms, but that's what we mean. It's always sequential. So essentially, if there's an outstanding balance at the end of the student's enrollment, you just look at that outstanding balance and determine how many payment periods are not fully paid based on how much the student still owes to determine whether there are any periods that are unpaid. We've also heard that there are questions about federal work study, which are, I think, very good questions. So federal work study funds that are paid directly to a student, which is the typical way that federal work study funds are paid, and not applied to a student's account, do not trigger this requirement because the funds are not going onto the account. If the student chose, they could simply take those wages and pay the school directly, at which point it would be a payment on the student's account. But anything that's not on a student's account does not count for these purposes. So separately, if a student or parent enters into an agreement to pay the institution, and that generally means a payment plan, and is making payments according to the agreement, the amount of that agreement is added to funds that are fully paid when determining whether charges have been paid. So anytime that you have a payment plan like this, it must be included in the total that is considered paid when you're determining whether any credits may not be transcripted. All right, so now I want to walk through some of the guidance that the department has provided, either in the Federal Register notice, where we publish the final rules on this topic, or in the frequently asked questions that my colleagues just referred to, that are published on the Office of Post-Secondary Education's website. So first, some items about implementation. The new requirements related to transcripts are effective on July 1st, 2024, as you all know. Those requirements are retroactive, meaning that institutions must provide, upon request, transcripts in accordance with both of those new requirements that I mentioned to all students who qualify, even if the balance owed is attributable to prior payment periods before July 1st, 2024. And we also have had questions about how the department will enforce these requirements, and we'll do so through our normal enforcement mechanisms, including program reviews, audits, and other oversight mechanisms. Generally, the same appeal rights that schools have under all of those procedures will apply to these as well. But this does raise what I think is a best practice for institutions. Institutions that choose to do partial transcript holds should carefully document that they are permitted to do so under the regulations, and that the student does not qualify because they have made payments and received Title IV aid for the periods in question. That kind of careful documentation is something that the financial aid offices have done for many years about many aspects of their work. This is an important area where my recommendation would be that you carefully document those cases for audit or program review purposes if it comes up. Now, we've also received a lot of questions about payment plans. So amounts associated with institutional loans, payment plans, and other agreements are treated, as I mentioned, as funds that are fully paid for these purposes. But if a student misses a payment or never makes a payment, then we do not consider the full amount of the payment plan to count. toward the total amount of funds that have been paid toward the student's account. One important consideration, we do expect that institution policies for payment plans are consistent for all students, including for students who are interested in obtaining a transcript. The department is concerned about cases where schools might treat those students differently, and we would have to scrutinize those cases very carefully if we saw them. The expectation is that policies are consistent for all of your learners. An institution is permitted to wait for the student to make their first payment in a payment plan before providing them with a transcript, because at that point, no payments have been made, and the institution does not know whether the student is in good standing on that payment plan. So that's one other thing the department has stated. So now to the concept of partial transcript holds. Institutions are permitted to provide students with partial official transcripts that do not include credits for payment periods in which a student did not receive Title IV funds, or where institutional charges were not paid, or both. I have the term partial official transcripts here. I think the term that the community is using for this is partial transcript holds. So read that there on the slide where I say that. Obviously, schools can also discontinue the practice of withholding transcripts entirely in order to comply with these procedures. And the department doesn't maintain any specific requirements for partial transcript holds. Institutions should ensure that they're complying with any requirements established by accrediting agencies or states, but the department itself does not have specific requirements for this, and the schools are the ones who have the discretion to decide how this would work at their campuses. So the regulations never require an institution to confer a degree or a credential to a student who has not fully paid the amount that they owe to the school, except in cases
David?
in that first
David,
category of administration of Title IV funds. If a student, yeah.
Sorry to break you up there. You were packeting a bit
can you
on
guys
this
hear me?
slide. You were packeting a bit. If you wouldn't mind repeating yourself on that slide.
Sure, I can go back. So the regulations never require an institution to confer a degree or a credential to a student who has not fully paid the amount that they owe the school, except in the first category of requirements that I mentioned a moment ago, where the institution made an error in its administration of Title IV funds. In that case, the school does need to provide even a degree or credential to the student, even if they still have a balance that they owe. If a student owes a balance that is due to error, fraud, or misconduct, the school must provide that credential, and then they must also avoid taking any other negative action against the student for that balance. Just want to go through a couple of other frequently asked questions. Can a college hold a transcript if a borrower defaults on a federal Perkins loan or nursing loan? And really the answer is I think a general one. These requirements only pertain to outstanding balances. They do not refer to loan defaults or any other practice at institutions. They are specifically looking at cases where the student does not have it. The school is withholding part of a transcript because the student has not paid their outstanding balance. So loan defaults are not included in these requirements. Second question here, what if failure to return equipment results in a debt after a certain amount of time? If the rental is considered an allowable institutional charge and the late return results in a debt, we treat that as a case where not all institutional charges have been paid for that payment period. So we would, in that case, treat that as a period that you are not required to transcript the credits for. The institutional charge concept is one that your financial aid office is probably familiar with, and probably maybe your business office as well. But it does have a lot of guidance that the department has provided over time that you can find in the Federal Student Aid Handbook, which I'll mention in just a second. So obviously there's a lot to take in with these new requirements. So there are some resources that are available to you right now that are provided by the department. First, the Federal Register notice itself that established the regulations that was published on October 31st, 2023. The Dear Colleague letter, Gen 2407, published fairly recently, that provides a summary of the requirements, and the frequently asked questions that we have mentioned a couple of times for certification procedures that are published on the Office of Post-Secondary Education's website. We'll also describe the requirements in the Federal Student Aid Handbook, Volume 2, which is scheduled for publication in early July. And with that, I think we can turn to questions.
Well, first of all, I'd just like to thank David for taking the time this afternoon. My name is William Gill. I'm the Senior Director of Government Relations for AACRAO. And it's really great to see such a great turnout, nearly 600 folks. Your presentation was super informative. Just so everybody know, there've been several questions about access to the PowerPoint. We'll put that up. We'll also have, there's been conversations about being able to view the recording. That will be up. Previous recordings, go to the AACRAO webinar section where those PowerPoints and webinars have also been placed up there. So just make sure that everybody's aware of those. But you did cover a lot. I mean, really important information that's been out there for the community. You know, questions regarding Perkins loans, federal work study, the retroactive of July 1, starting July 1, 2024. You did, you know, a lot of super information regarding payment plans. An individual must be a good standing, and then the institution is able to withhold the transcript on this until they receive that first payment. Talk about what the additional flexibility regarding the credentials, which is a separate topic. And you mentioned also state versus federal, which is a huge consternation for some of our members, as some states, especially some publics in different states, are mandated to withhold transcripts until payment is complete. Can you just really quickly go into that again? Because I think in our previous conversations, you mentioned, you know, for individuals, it's going to be their own individual choice. And to touch base with their legal counsel.
Yeah, that's right. The department has not published guidance on that topic, and I certainly can't address it. I'm not an attorney. So in those cases, I do recommend that you consult with your legal counsel about the best approach to take. From the department's perspective, the requirement applies to all schools, regardless of other laws in the states. Which is why I think, and the states may feel the same way. So that's why your legal counsel is likely the best resource to answer those kinds of questions at this point.
So that's one of the first things that I wanted to ask, and there's lots of great questions. There's 33. I know Wendy's been tracking them as well as I've been trying to do the best of trying to answer, but it's been kind of hot firing through this all. I know you mentioned a little bit about non-financial reasons. You talked about equipment. Can you talk a little bit about the ability for an institution to say other, like parking tickets or conduct matters?
Sure. The regulations do not speak to student conduct. They refer only to balances owed. They also don't refer to anything except institutional charges. And that can be a bit of a complicated topic because only certain things are considered institutional charges. There are categories of things that are not institutional charges. If you are wondering whether something is an institutional charge, I recommend that you consult with your financial aid office. They likely know because they've asked that question many times. But I don't want to get into it too deeply here, but that's really the answer, is that if and only if it's an institutional charge, is it relevant for these purposes.
That's very helpful. And as we mentioned earlier, there were some, I want to thank all the folks that did ask questions before, and I did share them with David prior. And so So one of the questions that came up, David, is do these regulations apply to American universities abroad that receive Title IV funds?
They apply to all institutions that have program participation agreements with the secretary to participate in the Title IV programs. And because those foreign institutions do have PPAs with the department to provide direct loans, these requirements do apply to them as well.
Another one really specific about the could be some confusion regarding collection agency. The institution utilizes a collection agency to try to get the payment of those funds. Would that be considered an agreement?
When we say agreement to pay, we mean an agreement between the student or parent and the institution, not an agreement with an outside entity. So for purposes of the requirement related to non-payment, collections are permitted for those students as long as no error has been made, in which case by the institution in the administration of the Title IV funds, in which case the other requirement supersedes and the school is not permitted to take that negative action against the student.
Okay, yeah, that would be, if I know we've talked a lot about and possibly additional some additional FAQs. I think that's one of the deciphering would be a good one. Let me see. I mean, you've talked a lot about the balances and good standings and institutional agreements. Another question that we've seen is being able to utilize the transcript notation on somebody that leaves our institution, isn't a payment plan, but they transfer to a different institution. Just we want to give another institution a heads up that this person still owes us a debt.
Yeah, the department doesn't have a particular position on that. That's an internal operational practice of the institution, and our regulations don't speak to it. So institutions will have to decide whether that's an appropriate practice for themselves.
Yeah, because so the concept of notations on transcript is also a in the weeds issue. And talking a little bit more about in the weeds, I know we shared with you our guidance, and just wanted to get your initial thoughts on what we are sharing with our members.
Sure. Yeah, I did take a look, and nothing in the guidance that you shared with me, struck any particular nerves or caused any concerns that, at least at first glance. Most of that guidance, in the department's view, is sort of addressing the concept of a partial transcript hold, which the department has already indicated is permitted under its regulations. But beyond that, the department doesn't oversee those more specific academic institutional procedures for handling those cases, and we don't have guidance on that topic. So institutions need to make those decisions for themselves.
I know that Wendy's also been tracking. We now have about 50 questions. Wendy, do you want to just jump in and start sending
Certainly.
what you're seeing?
Certainly. Thank you, Bill. And again, thank you, David, for being willing to take these questions. What I'm going to do in the interest of time, because some of the questions are being posted are about our guidance, I'd rather spend the time taking your expertise, right? And if we have time to address the guidance questions, we can. Part of the a general announcement, though, a lot of the questions that are being asked about our guidance is available in the other recording from last Wednesday and in that slide deck. So if you guys want to take a look there, if we can't get to the questions today. So Dave, we have several questions about diplomas. So the actual, piece of paper that people get on both sides of the equation. So paragraph 33 and paragraph 34. So can you withhold a diploma if there's not an error made in administering financial aid funds?
So assuming
there's an unpaid balance, sorry.
Yeah, that's the key, right? So if there's an unpaid balance and the school is holding the diploma, by definition, the department doesn't require you to provide all, anything related to a degree, diploma, or other credential. The regulation only speaks to transcripts for a very specific reason. We're focused on those transcripts. And we also acknowledge that in cases where the student has not fully paid for all of the coursework that they've taken, they have from the school's perspective, they have not completed all of the requirements for that degree or other credential or diploma, et cetera. So the school is not required to provide a degree or other credential based on that 34 provision. Now, if the 33 provision applies and the school has made an error in the administration of Title IV funds, withholding a diploma or a degree, et cetera, is considered a negative action that is not permitted. So in those cases, if you, the institution, determine that an error has been made, you need to be sure that you release that to the student. Again, if the balance owed is related to the error.
Fair enough. Thank you for the clarification. And you may have addressed Perkins loans specifically, but I'm trying to read the questions and listen at the same time. So pardon me, we have a couple of questions about specifically Perkins loans. If a past due Perkins loan, can the institution hold the transcript?
Yeah, again, it's a good question, but these new requirements do not address Perkins loans or whether the student is past due, then they are permitted to continue it.
David, you broke up there a little bit, but I want to rephrase what I think I heard, is that the new regulations do not address the Perkins loan component.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's status quo for the school practices.
Okay. Let's see. Are there any institutional types that are exempt or can take exception to the regulation? Examples: private versus public versus proprietary.
No, all institutions that have program participation agreements with the secretary to participate in the Title IV programs are subject to these requirements. So no category of schools is exempted.
Okay. Please confirm that paragraph 34, quote, requires institutions to provide transcripts, end quote, does not preclude it requiring students to pay for transcripts.
Correct. That is correct. In the Federal Register notice, the department specifically noted that the institutions are permitted to charge a nominal fee as they have in the past, and it is not our intent to change that practice. Schools may continue to charge a nominal fee to obtain an official transcript.
Okay. Thank you. When you say, quote, error, end quote, does that mean confirmed error, or the student has just accused the institution of an error? Second part of the question. What if it is being contested that the university made an error, and who determines that there was an error?
Yep, that's a really good question. The institution needs to make a determination about whether there was an error or not. And ultimately, the student could contest that and for example, submit a complaint to the department if they disagree with the school. If that were to happen, the department would investigate and collect documentation from the school to determine whether the student's point of view was sound. And that's why I mentioned earlier that it's a good practice if the school decides to withhold a partial transcript, do a partial transcript hold, that it does not have any errors that were associated with it. So it's also a good practice then for the institution to document when it believes it did make an error, so that and then share that information with its registration office and its business office. So I think that this area requires actually quite a bit of collaboration among offices at your institutions, the financial aid office, the business office, and the registration office. Because how would the registration office know if an error was made without the financial aid office, generally who is doing a lot of this work, making that determination? So ultimately, it is an institutional determination. You guys are going to have to make that decision. It's not just whether the student raises their hands and says, I think you made an error. The institution decides and then makes a judgment based on that decision. And although the student can question it and come to the department and we can investigate it, Generally speaking, if you can document your point of view, you generally will be able to make that stand up with the department. Will accept documentation that the school maintains.
Wendy, can I jump in here real quick?
Certainly.
Yeah, we got a couple FERPA questions. This is a little big deal for us in our community. So it's going back a little bit to transcript notations. And I don't know if we're going to be able to get a response, but one institution is planning to do, they may be releasing an incomplete record with no indication thereof and may include a notation. They're wondering if then we are exposing indirect financial information that would not be covered under in the standard FERPA release language. So basically, they're going to do. They're thinking about putting a notation, but they're concerned about financial information that's going to be released, as well as the partial aspect. Is this going to be in violation of FERPA?
Yeah, I since I'm not a FERPA expert, my expertise is in the Title IV programs. I don't think I can answer that one today, but I definitely want to take that one back. So William and Wendy, if you could get a write-up for that question and send it my way. I think the department's FERPA office would want to evaluate that one. Might be something we can provide some guidance about.
Great. The second one is, if a college decides to release partial transcript, should the college notate on the transcript that the transcript is a partial transcript? If so, how? Again, is this a FERPA violation if the college states that it's a partial transcript?
Yeah, again, that's not one that I can answer.
Right.
Yeah.
But we'll definitely follow up. I know that it's a question.
Yeah,
but
sure.
yeah. Our folks are very concerned about adhering to FERPA regs.
As they should, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's good they're asking
Absolutely.
the questions. And I'm glad we have the opportunity to get some guidance from you those specifically about that. Let's see. What if a balance is from an R2 T4 because the student withdrew and didn't earn all of their aid? Can they still withhold the transcript?
Yes. The return of Title IV process often does cause a balance to be owed at the institution. And so if there is a balance owed for that final payment period, for that final term, the school is not required to transcript credits for that final term. So it's that just like anything else, if it results in a balance, then that's a balance on the account, and not all institutional charges have been paid at that time. So yeah, it means for that term, the school would still obviously be required to transcript credits for all of the other periods where the student received Title IV aid and for which all charges were paid.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
This is a very long one, but it is a scenario that exists for students at institutions. So if I have to read it a couple times, just let me know, okay, because it's a long one. This is, can we carefully and slowly go over what was said about the sequential application of payment of funds? It sounds to me that any payment made would be applied to the oldest outstanding charge, but that may not be how Title IV aid actually did pay the charges on a student account. For example, in term 1, they could have had no aid. In term 2, they could have had 50% of their charges covered by aid. And then in term 3, they could have had 100% aid cover their aid. Under this common scenario, there would be a balance in term 1, half of term 2, but term 3 would be cleared. It sounds like your clarification indicates that even though the aid only applied to term 2 and term 3, we would need to release term 1 and term 2, but could restrict term 3.
Wow, yeah, that's a difficult one. I wish I could had a whiteboard to
Right,
write
if then.
that out. So I think that
David, you just froze.
the question is conflating two different.
You might have to repeat yourself,
And I wanna
David. You might have to repeat yourself.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
It caught back up.
My apologies for the internet issues that I seem to be having here. So I think the question is conflating two different things, and I want to make sure that we're all clear on those first. So there's two conditions that require a school to transcript credits for a particular term. Condition one is that the student received at least $1 of Title IV aid for that term. Condition two is that the charges for that term are fully paid by anything, whether it's a student payment, whether it's a Title IV aid, whether it's a scholarship, whether it's an institutional scholarship, doesn't matter. Is the charge paid? So when you're looking in that question, what I think I heard was no Title IV was received in term number one. Is that right?
That's correct.
Is that what the question said?
Sorry, David, you're freezing again.
Already, that means that the school is not required to transcript credits. Point. Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah,
It's come back.
we might have to go back and redo that one.
So let me try again though. So if in the question it sounds like for that first term they didn't receive Title IV aid, so that means that both conditions were not met that would require the school to transcript credits for that first term. So they're not required to transfer credits for term one.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, when we're talking about whether institutional charges are paid, it's with anything. And actually, I see someone suggested I turn my camera off. I'm going to try that and see, and it may help. So apologies. Let's see if that does any good. Okay. Can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Let's hope that this works. So when you're talking about whether all institutional charges are paid, we mean with anything. It could be with Title IV aid, it could be with institutional scholarships, it could be with outside scholarships, it could be anything that pays for institutional charges. So if they are fully paid, regardless of how they paid for that first term, that term is fully paid. But as I mentioned, if they didn't get Title IV, you're already not required to transfer credits for that term. Now, looking at the second term in that scenario, if they receive Title IV funds and they're fully paid for the second term, they would be required to transcript credits for that term. Now we get to term three. If they received Title IV aid in term three, but there is a balance owed that is not fully paid for term three, they're not required to transcript credits for term three. So in the scenario provided, although this is complicated, the school is not required to transcript credits for terms 1 and 3, but it would be required to transcript credits for term 2. Just remember,
thank you for.
yeah, that
Go
the
ahead.
requirements are term by term, and both conditions have to be met in order for the transcripts to be required to be transcripted, the credits to be required to be transcripted.
Thank you very much. It was like you said, needed a whiteboard, like an if-then statement on that one.
Yes.
And David, before we keep going on, we want to be mindful of a couple of things. One, we only have about 7 minutes left in our scheduled time. But if you have time, putting you on the spot, I apologize for that. I think this topic is important enough for our members, and I think Bill agrees, that if you have the time to continuing answering the questions, that we can continue this recording. If that works for you, and we completely understand if it does not, because we did not ask you this in advance.
Unfortunately, I do have a commitment
Okay.
starting at 3 p.m. But we can also talk, folks, about having another session if that would be helpful in the future.
Fair enough. Thank you. Thank
That'd
you
be
for
great.
yeah. So let's see what. So this is I think there's an easier version or a less complex version of the previous question. So if a student does have Title IV aid, but it does not cover the entire institutional balance, and they have a payment plan do not make a payment, can we withhold the transcript as all institutional charges have not been covered?
Well, I want to be careful with the wording there.
Mm-hmm.
You can do a partial transcript hold that does not include the credits for the term that is not fully paid. That's what but yes, when you're thinking about whether a term is fully paid, an amount that is part of an agreement to pay, where the student has not made a payment or is not in good standing with the payments, you don't have to include that amount agreed upon. So in that case, they wouldn't have to transcript the credits for that final term. But they would still have to issue an official transcript with credits for all the other terms that the student, where the student had received Title IV aid and was fully paid up for.
Thank you. How, missing word here, I think, but how can we do if a student withdraws from the university after picking up the living expenses and the school returns the Title IV funds? I'm sorry, I can't fill in the blanks in that question. Maybe if the attendee wants to reword that, maybe. I don't quite understand the question. David, do you get the gist of it?
No, I don't. I
Okay.
think I might know, but I don't want to respond to something where
Okay.
I'm totally sure.
Makes sense. We are not withholding transcripts, but intend to block future registration for outstanding balances. These are situations where the institution is not in error in administering financial aid funds. Can we block registration? I believe you addressed that. I believe we've talked about it too, but I think it's still an outstanding question for some folks.
The question is very well worded and very specific, and the answer is yes. If 33 doesn't apply and there was no error, then the school is permitted to block registration in those cases. The regulation only pertains to transcripts.
Thank you. And just a brief aside, Bill and I just consulted via chat. We are going to try to address the AACRAO guidance. We're going to continue the recording to address the AACRAO guidance questions after David has to leave, and then we will regroup with David about the questions really for him. So if you can stay on, attendees, we will address the AACRAO guidance questions until we run out of questions for this recording. So back to David. Can the balance owed still be sent to collections and incur collection fees even if they receive their transcript?
Assuming that the conditions for 33 don't apply, so there's no error. Yes, there's the 34 only pertains to transcripts. And it does not prohibit a school from taking other negative actions, for example, putting someone in collections or establishing a registration hold. It only pertains to transcripting the credits that the student has earned and received Title IV for and has fully paid for.
Thank you. This one is an important one because is voiding or dropping registration for non-payment during a term considered a negative action? That is a big question because our institutions do drop for non-payment processes.
Yes. Yep. So if not permitted if it was related to an error, but obviously that is only relevant if there is an error at stake. So if the school has determined that there is an error, it should not hold the student's registration for a balance owed because that would be considered a negative action.
Okay. To confirm, though, they are still allowed to proceed with the drop for non-payment processes that they currently have in place if there's a balance owed and it's not due to an institutional error in administering Title IV funds.
That's exactly right.
Okay. I had this question in a couple different ways. Is there a specific time frame that institutions must provide a transcript to allow time to discuss delinquent account balances? So the various permutations of that is we'd like to put in a flag that says, hey, you need to come talk to us before we release your transcript. We've received that kind of permutation several times. So like instead of immediately releasing a transcript, it says, come talk to us, call us, chat with us, whatever. And then that gives the institution a chance to say, hey, you owe us some money. You want to enter in a payment plan. Let's see how we can work this out. Are they allowed to do that? Or is there anything that says that they must release that transcript immediately?
The department,
if a payment plan's not in place. I mean, in place,
yeah.
Sorry.
So I'm assuming in this situation, yeah, there's no payment plan. There is a balance owed. The department has not opined on any questions about timing of releasing transcripts. That might be helpful for me to take back. I don't think I can answer that one today. So if you guys could write that one up for me as well, it would be really helpful. And I'll take it back to talk with my colleagues about.
Fair enough. What happens if an error is corrected and the results show a balance remains either higher or lower than previously assumed?
In that case, the balance is due to an error. And if the balance on the account exceeds the amount that's due to the error, then the school is still permitted to withhold transcripts under the other condition. So remember that when we're talking about the error, we're only talking about the balance that is related to the error. And one of the things the department did not intend was, for example, a student who had not paid $5,000, and then an institutional error resulted in an additional balance of $500. That we would not expect the school to be required to provide all the credits on that transcript to that student. We're only looking at the balance that was created by the error, and that's an important distinction there. But again, that's another reason that carefully identifying that dollar amount is important if the institution determines that it's made an error.
Thank you, David. We have a lot of other questions where you have to jump off, and we understand that and respect that. So Bill and I will work together on getting those questions organized for you, and we very much appreciate your time today. Do you have any closing comments for us before you have to hop off?
Well, no, not except thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. These are really great questions, and hopefully we can get you some more answers.
Thank you.
We've come to realize that, as everybody is, this is it's so nuanced in so many different ways that I think everybody wants to be obviously an adherent to the new regulations, but they're used to doing things in a certain way, and so everybody's still trying to figure all this out. And we really appreciate you taking time. We will definitely look forward to taking you up on your offer of having another webinar, because people were really happy about that. And then probably have even more questions that after Wendy and I, you guys take back to your colleagues, and then we'll look to schedule something else in the future.
Happy to do it. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, David.
And again, thank you everyone for your questions and Q&A with David. Bill and I will work on it, but we understand some may still have to drop off of this webinar here, but we want to spend the time, since we have some of you and you might be able to stay, to address the AACRAO guidance questions specifically. So let me go back through these questions a little bit here. I have to sort through them. There's 59 open questions, and I'm trying to get to the ones that are just about AACRAO guidance. So first one, I think, why is AACRAO taking this position, and how does it showing the subject while suppressing the final grade benefit either the school or the student? Well, we're taking the position in partial transcript holds as permissible. We are not saying that you should do this. We are saying it's permissible, as David did say in his guidance, and as our data from our survey said, we have about 20% of our institutions, our member institutions, that are saying they intend to use partial transcript holds. So while our guidance is not saying you should do this, partial transcript holds, it's saying if you're going to do this, because it is permissible, that we want to use it as a standardized way, that we want to put information out there that shows, for example, rather than, as others have asked, about suppressing the entire content within a payment period / term and not showing that. So like the receiving employer or licensing agency or institution would have no idea that something is missing, but the guidance that mimics that incomplete or in progress grade, where it shows the course number, you don't even have to show a grade, so we'll get to that in a second. The course number, the subject and the title and the term, maybe even the number of credits, that shows it. And your transcript key shows it or explains, or an annotation explains why there isn't a grade there for that term, if that term has concluded. What that does for the learner is at least allows them to go from one place to the next with, like, hey, this stuff is here. I'm addressing some issues that are similar to incomplete grades or in progress. But in this case, it's an unpaid balance. But I'd like you to either consider me for employment or transfer me to your institution and advise me if you can, and make registration decisions and all those things. And it tells the receiving institution or other body, hey, there's something here. Let's engage in a conversation with this person who's providing this to me. This isn't quite complete. We're expecting to see something here, and engage with that person either as the employer, the licensing body, or the other institution, and says, hey, how do we go about getting the rest of this information so we can make accurate decisions about you? So again, AACRAO's position is not that everyone should use partial transcript holds, but because it is permissible and our members are saying they intend to do so, that we should have this standardized practice. And that's, again, today I only summarized, I'll hit the very high levels of that guidance, and we will be putting it out in its entirety very shortly. Plus, it's also in detail in the previous recording that's available on our AACRAO website. So Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, no, go ahead. I just wanted to reiterate that none of our guidance is shall, but it's all
Mhm.
may, and we're probably if we take a step back, these are some in order for everybody to be on the same page, and we all have to reevaluate the current business processing that we have. AACRAO's making this suggestion in order to try to be provide equity across higher ed. And, I think that's our stance, right? Like, this is the regs that now allow you specific what you can and cannot do regarding transcript and partial transcript.
Exactly. It falls in line with our guidance that we provide in our academic records and transcript guide. So in there, we have very specific by variable name, recommended, required, those kind of things where you say not recommended either in the student information system or on the transcript. So this guidance follows along with that, where we're saying this is what we think the best practice is because these things are permissible. And I have a comment here, putting in placeholder grades seems like it's really bad practice and ripe for human error. Anything that manipulates the transcript in this manner has potential for error. But in the deeper guidance, again, it has make sure you talk to all the other departments, including information technology, academic advising, as David said, the cashiering and the bursar and financial aid, and make sure you test your systems. If your institution intends to do this, and you follow our guidance on partial transcript holds, which you're not required to do, that you make sure there are checks and balances for human error. We recommend in the guidance to do automatic reporting, to make sure the communication with the student is very strong and clear, all those kind of things to try to reduce the human error. And someone follows up with a question about new grade code used with a GPA. We mentioned in there that specifically we're saying you got to make sure it's not included in all of those things, just like in progress courses wouldn't be, or incomplete grades would not be as well. So that's in our deeper guidance that is available. We have that FERPA question. Bill asked that, the FERPA question. So we're going to get some clarification, hopefully from the department there. Does AACRAO not realize the working costs involved with creating a new grade code, grade legend, and transcript paper? Absolutely. That's why we're trying to get this guidance out here now, because if you're going to choose to follow the guidance that says to include this information, and that then your transcript is clear to receiving parties, that there is going to be a lot of things that have to go along with creating a new grade code, a grade legend, and if you're using paper transcript papers, also communicating with your electronic transcript provider. But again, we're not telling you have to use partial transcript holds.
No, and Wendy, I think what we're trying to also highlight is the fact that there's a lot of individual questions that an institution must decide. Are they going to maintain, are they just going to release the transcript? Are they going to do a partial transcript hold? How is that going to work with the bursar's office? How is that going to work with financial aid? So I think what we're trying to highlight is the fact that conversations, if you haven't started, which many I'm sure are deep knee into this, that these are new processes that you guys have to try to implement, and conversations need to be happening on campus.
Correct. And there's a question that is a couple of questions combined here that follows up about if we AACRAO grade recommendations, we're all going to know that the new grade code means that so in essence we are issuing a grade code to tell other schools that the student didn't pay. That with the guidance, again, in detail, it says use something that says you can call it unpaid balance, or you can call it administrative reason, you can call it whatever you want. You can, whatever your institution decides internally that you want to call the grade code is your choice. We are going to get some guidance as to whether or not that releases the financial information with regards to FERPA. So that may provide clarification of what type of grade code you could use. You could even leave it blank. It doesn't have to be a grade code. It's just, again, we're saying keep the essence of it is that the record, that the course and subject and title and term information is retained and on the transcript in some way. If you intend to use partial transcript holds, as I'm repeating myself, so that the receiving body understands there's something that's still there.
Yeah. And as was mentioned, however an institution chooses to show that red flag is really up to the individual institution.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
yeah.
And we have several comments about that. This is a lot of work, and it says, would we not let students pick and choose what parts of transcripts are released? The transcripts as a full academic history. No, we're not implying that students should be able to pick and choose what transcripts or what parts of transcripts are released or not in this partial transcript hold. This is entirely up to the institution whether you engage with this practice. Again, academic renewal and academic forgiveness practices are somewhat similar to this, where the grade is changed or suppressed or hidden on some institutional practices for that. So again, it's not outside the norm of regular practices. But you're not required to. If it's too much of a burden and you guys don't want to do it at your institution, you are not required to. We have some members that are in this pickle where the state requires them to do something to reclaim unclaimed balances. And so they have to do something. And that's why we're kind of saying here that they have to have a standardized practice.
Yeah, I'm seeing some chats and questions, Wendy, again about the practice of partial transcript holds, right? And the negative aspect of not receiving a full academic record. We're not saying that you should do a partial transcript hold. This is, if you choose as an institution to do a partial transcript hold, these are some of the parameters that you have. We're not we're not saying that, you know, this is not a shall, but you may. And we're just highlighting where there's going to be overlap in conversations that are going to need to take place at an institution.
Yeah, and I appreciate the concern about it, absolutely. But again, we have members who are saying they are going to do this. And if we reflect that data sample that we got, it actually means because it was a representative sample statistically. What it means is there are about 500 to 700 institutions in this country that say they're either considering issuing partial transcript holds or intend to and will or already do use partial transcript holds. And since there's no guidance on that, that's what we're doing here, because they're allowed to do it. And people's opinions about whether it's too much work or it's unfair or those kind of things are fair and comments to apply here. And we're not disagreeing with those, just trying to apply some standards. Okay, let's see if we have anything else. I think most of these are comments or questions to David, I think. Let me scroll through them. Do you see any more, Bill, that might be specifically for us?
It was just a suggestion that we would update the recommendation to indicate a term was withheld on the transcript so the recipient will be aware that coursework is missing. And again, what we're saying is that this is a brave new world, and you guys need to have those conversations. We're just providing the parameters of what these new set of regulatory guidance or the regulations mean for business practices at an institution, what you can and cannot do. This is what, you know, these are the kind of, you know, to stimulate conversations for all of you.
And Bill, to your point, I would like to emphasize the beginning of our guidance says that we strongly support, and in our other transcript and records guidance in our books said that all information should be included on the transcript. So that's why we lean very strongly into, if you're going to use partial transcript holds, that you don't block the entirety of the term for the very reasons we've discussed here. That so somebody knows that something is happening, so that you're not just blocking out the entire term and hiding the whole thing so people can't tell. Would want to answer this one question. I would like to underscore the question related to blocking registration for future semesters. Is that allowable? That's been asked several times here.
Yes.
It is not. It is if there's not institutional error. That's correct. So that's the difference between paragraph 34 and paragraph 33. I don't. Can we use a transcript hold to encourage students to set up a payment plan, even if we have payment plans on prior payment periods, but not all? Once payment is set up in the final payment period, then we release the transcript. David did answer that you can absolutely put things in place to encourage conversations for students to come in and see you and give, say, because they don't have a payment plan in place at the time of the transcript request. Remember, that's paragraph 34. So there's no payment plan in place at the time of the transcript request. So it is permissible for the institution to place a hold on that payment period. Remember, you have to look at each payment period individually. And you can use that hold for that payment period to encourage them to come and talk to you and complete a payment plan if that's the condition for releasing. And that in this particular case is if there are no errors.
And I would put an additional caveat on that, which I thought was interesting, that an institution has the flexibility to withhold the transcript, not only with the payment plan in place, but also upon receipt of that first payment of the plan. And so, you know, the student could take a week, could take a month, but until you receive that first payment, an institution can withhold that transcript.
Yes, that is correct. To clarify, is it correct to say that the AACRAO guidance is that issuing a partial transcript is okay as long as the partial transcript includes all the courses the student attempted, but the final grades of some courses may be excluded, or the final grades can be changed to a new grade to denote the grade is being withheld due to administrative reason? Is this different from an incomplete transcript? So let me parse that question out. We are using the term partial transcript hold because we said at the beginning and we say in our guidance, a partial transcript in practice prior to this regulation coming along, partial transcript is where an institution is releasing like a graduate portion of the transcript and not the undergraduate of a student who has both, or the other way around. It gives the student the permission to say, I only want you to release my undergraduate record, not my graduate. So it's separation by level. That's a partial transcript. We are differentiating that from partial transcript hold because the regulation talks about holds. So you're holding back a portion of the transcript, which is different than releasing a partial transcript. I know that's sort of a nuance, but people are getting confused about that. So we're using those two terms. So to answer the question, a student attempted, but the final grade of some courses may be excluded. Yes, as long as it's not due to an institutional error or the denote a grade is being withheld due to administrative reasons. Yes, that is our guidance that we are saying you should actually do something like that. And is this different from an incomplete transcript? My gut answer on that is an incomplete transcript doesn't show the receiving party that something is there, like it's just missing some certain components, but maybe that's word parsing there. I hope that helps. Somebody's asking the diploma question again. The regulation does not address diploma. So if there's no institutional error, you can withhold the diploma for an unpaid balance because the regulation is only addressing transcripts.
Even if they enter into a payment plan, until that balance is paid by the student, the institution can withhold the diploma.
That's correct. Oh, from an admission standpoint, we make the student provide a transcript for all courses taken. Would we be in violation if we receive a partial transcript for a transferring student and do not admit the student until we see all grades? I would, in that particular initial reaction to that is I would treat the partial transcript hold in the same way, and that's what our guidance says, because we say for admissions offices, treat the partial transcript hold where you see the courses and the subject and the title, but maybe the grades are missing in this particular guidance, as you would in complete or in progress courses. So a student sends you a transcript in the spring, they're trying to transfer to you in the fall. Their courses in the spring have perhaps a grade of IP. So handle the transcript in the same way is our guidance for that. All your processes, everything else you do, our advice to you from the admission standpoint would be to treat them the same. And when we reiterate that, AACRAO says across the board, we're saying if you're going to do partial transcript holds, treat all students the same, not just those that are immediately impacted by this regulation, but across the board, standard procedure for everyone.
Yeah, regardless if they're a recipient of Title IV or not a recipient of Title IV, because we don't want to create two separate classes, right? Like if a non-recipient of Title IV holds a balance, you can hold that transcript until you can hold that transcript until that person is fully paid. It does, regardless if they enter a payment plan.
Correct. I have a couple of questions again about timing of the release of the transcript. David answered those. There's nothing in the regulation that dictates how long it takes an institution to release the transcript. Because that ties back to that. Can you use the transcript hold because they don't have a payment plan as a pause, hey, let's have this discussion. Let's enter into payment plan and then release the transcript. The regulation does not address the timing, like nothing dictates how quickly that must happen.
By regulatory guidance and the FAQ, it's basically they can withhold the transcript until the institution receives not only the payment plan agreed, but also the first payment, however that takes.
Am I hearing that correctly, that institutions do not treat Title IV students differently, such as withholding entire transcripts? Our guidance is that we suggest, again, it's not a compliance. AACRAO does not issue compliance requirements or shall statements, but is to treat all students equally. If at all possible, and your institution decides to do so, that would be our recommendation, is to treat all students equally. Let's see. Can a new poll be completed on what schools plan to do starting July 1st? We did that poll. We just did it. 524 institutions responded. That report was, that data was addressed in the webinar last Wednesday. The report that details all the plans and concerns will be released on June 26th. We will probably revisit the question sometime in the next year to see what they ultimately landed on doing. Some of these are repeats. I suggest if you have questions about degree earned on the, if there's an outstanding balance and those kind of things, conferring a degree, the Dear Colleague letter addresses those, but the guidance does not restrict it. I think, and again, I think we're very concerned now transcripts won't show a full academic record. AACRAO should communicate a stronger suggestion to notate that something is missing. These annotations should be mandatory so the college know it's not a full transcript. We are not making a recommendation on annotation. However, our guidance, as we just shared, about mirroring the incomplete in progress process, that is the reflection. That is the saying that there's something missing here, while still providing enough information for the admissions question, because they're going to see the course subject and title and perhaps credit hours, so that it still is enough information that further processes and further engagements with employers and accrediting licensing bodies can take some action. So again, refer pretty much to go back to our guidance that will be released in full here shortly, if not today, in the next couple of days. We'll be posting it to our website and releasing it to the members. Melanie, I don't know if you're still here, and I also don't mean to put you on the spot. If you had anything to say about whether or not it's going to go out via an email to everyone or just be posted to our website or some combination thereof. I know she had to run to another meeting. Wow, there's a lot of still 60 open questions. One last thing before we can wrap up here, I think, because we'll have to go through these again with a fine-tooth comb and make sure we get the questions to David. If the receiving institution of a partial transcript, I'm going to say partial transcript hold, is not required to accept it as a full transcript according to the regulations, is that correct? The regulations say nothing about how you process transcripts with partial transcript holds. Our guidance, as I stated earlier, is to, if you know, because if the sending institution is mirroring this practice and you know that something is missing, like in progress and incomplete, that you treat them in your admissions process like you would somebody with in progress or incomplete grades. Whatever that practice you currently do now, that's the one you replicate when you receive it. But the regulation says nothing about it at all, nothing. You can choose to do what you choose. Does a transcript have to be official? Well, this is talking about official transcripts. So that, this is regulation applies to official transcripts, period. They're not addressing unofficial transcripts. Okay. The term partial transcript hold is causing confusion on our campus. It sounds like the term really refers to the process and not to the type of transcript. That's correct. It's a partial transcript hold. It is the process. To ask the previous question a different way, when I'm referring to a transcript that an institution received that was released under the partial transcript hold process, how do I refer to that transcript saying, this is a partial transcript hold transcript? I would refer to the transcript initial reaction is the same way you would for something that is missing, that has in progress courses or incomplete courses. That's what our guidance would say. Treat it the same way coming in. On our definitions are in the guidance trying to clarify these two terms because we don't want people to confuse that already existing practice of releasing undergraduate or graduate records separately at the student's request that some institutions already do, which is a partial transcript, from this process of withholding a portion of a transcript in response to the transcript hold regulation. I know I'm repeating myself, but I just want to make sure we're trying to get this information here. But with that, because we're up on a half an hour over, I think, Bill, if you agree, we will wrap this up and collect these questions again and sort through them, go back to the department with, as we discussed with David, go back to the department about setting up additional time with him. If there are any other things in these 57 now open questions that relate specifically to the guidance that we haven't already talked about here, or is not already addressed in the guidance that AACRAO is releasing, we will also answer those. So for those of you who stuck with us, 234 participants who stuck with us throughout this whole thing, thank you very much. Appreciate you, and we will be back with more. Take care.
Thank you.